back to Choppin with Chapman. So today's video is going to be slightly different than anything we've talked about in the past. I got a request from my friend Carlos to not talk about the chops of our hands, not talk about the chops of our brains, but rather the chops of our lives. So today's video is going to focus on avoiding burnout, as a lot of us are returning to school these past couple weeks or in the coming few weeks, and maybe a few of us have more responsibilities, more added responsibilities than we've had in the previous several months. I thought this would be a good time to talk about ways we can avoid burning out on playing music, which is a really big, scary topic. So throughout this video, I'm going to provide you with 5 of my own tips that I've come across to avoid burnout, and hopefully you can find something in this video that's helpful, and hopefully manage your time behind the instrument and make yourself happier and more productive when you're playing music. Throughout this, you'll also notice that at no point am I going to tell you to take any time off from music. I do think that is really solid advice for those of us who are experiencing a little bit of burnout from music, but I know it's not always a possibility. For those of you who might be in high school, you know, you're in these ensembles and your grades might depend on performing well in them. Or if you're in college, you might be on a scholarship or you might be with financial aid. So it's not really an option for you to take a semester off or a year off or anything like that. So everything we're going to talk about today is focused on ways that you can still perform your responsibilities as a musician, as a young professional, but hopefully kind of reinvigorate some of the ways that you approach playing music and your appreciation for music. So before we get into any of the tips today, what I thought I'd do is take you through my own personal journey with burnout, basically when I experienced it, how I overcame it, and things that I even still do to this day to help fend it off. So that if you're experiencing these feelings and you're maybe thinking that music is not working out for you, that you know that you're not alone, and that there have been plenty of other people, in fact, all musicians I know personally, who have experienced this same thing and who have also overcome it. So music has always been a really big part of my life. My grandma had a piano in her house, so every time I would go to visit her, as far back as I can really remember, you know, I would plink around with different sounds and try to figure out different sounds I could make and what notes made different combinations, stuff like that. My dad was a music major in college. I had an uncle who was a professional tenor sax player. So in my family, music has always been revered, and it's been a really big part of my upbringing. So there was never really any question for me of like, this is the thing I'm going to do, and I can't imagine myself doing anything else, really. Until my junior year of college showed up, and I was practicing too much. I was in too many ensembles. I was not performing well in any of my non-musical classes, and I just started to hate everything about music. It got to a point, I remember specifically, I had to go to a wind symphony rehearsal one morning, and the thought of that just made me physically ill. Not that I hated wind symphony or it was a terrible experience, because I really value everything I've learned in that ensemble. But it's just, I couldn't face the thought of like having to go play music that day. So I took about a year off from school and music pretty much entirely until I decided to come back to it, mostly through teaching. Kind of rediscovered my love of music through helping other people kind of discover their loves of music. And since then, I've tried to find a good like work-life balance that works for me to maintain this level of, you know, I can still love playing this instrument and playing many different instruments, but I don't have to make it, you know, 100% of my life all the time. So that's kind of been my own experience. Just know if you are feeling this way, you're not alone. Again, everybody I know, I think, has felt this way at some point. And hopefully you can, through this story, you know that like there are ways to overcome it, and you don't have to feel this way forever. So that being said, let's get into some of these tips. So my first tip for avoiding burnout is maybe the hardest one to put into practice, but one of the most helpful ones that I've found to overcome those feelings of burnout. And that is learning to accept your own imperfections. You're not going to play all the right notes. You're going to miss phrases and play dynamics wrong and just everything. There are times when it's going to be really bad when you play music. And that's okay, because you're human. And there are going to be times when you're playing really, really well as well. I know for me, a big part of my burnout was I was feeling constantly judged being in academia, and I never felt like anything I was doing playing-wise was meeting the expectations that I had set for myself. So learning how to, you know, accept those imperfections and deal with them in your own way is one of the biggest things I think can help. The best way I've found to put this into practice is just play for other people as much as humanly possible. I know that's not always feasible in these times, but keeping an online practice log where other people can see the things that you're doing day to day, or just inviting friends over in a safe, socially distanced way, and like playing for each other, that can be a really great way to kind of get used to this idea that I'm gonna play wrong notes sometimes, and that's gonna be okay. It doesn't define who I am as a person. So my second tip for avoiding burnout is trying as best as you can to find your own work-life balance that works for you. Now, it's different for everybody, but I know for me, I can't maintain that like 10 to 12 hour a day practice schedule that you hear about like really successful musicians maintaining. Like you hear stories about like John Coltrane falling asleep with the saxophone still in his hands and stuff like that. And maybe that works for some people, but I know for me, if I don't maintain some kind of like scheduled practice regimen while I'm also doing other stuff, I burn out on this instrument and other instruments really, really quickly. So it's going to be different for every single person, and you kind of have to experiment with this, but you shouldn't feel like your self-worth is placed in how many hours a day that you spend behind your instrument. You are more than just a musician, and it's good to have a sense of who you are outside of playing these instruments, and so on and so forth. So again, just experiment with that. For you, it might be 1 to 2 hours of practice a day, and then you spend an hour or so a day just watching TV or playing video games or whatever it is that makes you happy. For me, schedules help a lot. So I have my entire weekly schedule listed, and I actually have blocked in my schedule times for playing video games where it's specifically like I have to play video games during that time, because I know it's helpful for me to kind of shut my brain off in those moments and not be worried about, how many notes am I going to play wrong in my next percussion ensemble rehearsal or anything like that. My third tip for avoiding burnout kind of goes hand in hand with that last one, which is find yourself a hobby that's not music related. I know for me, a large part of my burnout was I felt so ingrained with the music, and it really kind of defined who I felt like I was as a person, that I didn't feel like I had anything outside of it. So that when I started to not like music as much as I had in the past, and it started to frustrate me, I felt like I had nothing left, really. So find some other outlets that you enjoy. Go do some exercise, or take up a sport, or learn how to code or bake, or anything that makes you happy. As long as you have something outside of music to kind of provide you with, a community that you can connect with and some enjoyment in your life that isn't just this all the time. The fourth tip for avoiding burnout is find some other musical outlet that you enjoy that kind of takes you away from your comfort zone a little bit and doesn't have you focus so much on maybe your primary instrument or your main focus with music. Around the same time that I burned out, I started to discover more Hindustani music, which is North Indian classical music, and I started getting into playing guitar quite a bit, and rediscovering steel pan, all this different stuff. So by kind of taking my mind away from my primary instrument, I was still doing something musically productive, but I didn't have to stress so much about, defining myself by this instrument. So you can take up a new instrument or learn how to audio engineer and produce. There's so many different avenues for being musically creative and musically productive without having to worry about playing your instrument 100% of the time. So yeah, any kind of musical outlet, whether it's theory, ethnomusicology, any of these different things, just try to explore different realms of music so that you're not always playing your instrument 100% of the time. And lastly, the biggest thing for me to avoid burnout was just teaching. Helping other people discover the things that I thought was really cool about music really kind of reminded me how cool music actually is, and the reasons why I wanted to get into it into the first place. Now, not everybody has a teaching job, and I understand, and teaching can also be a real bummer. At my busiest, I was teaching 65 students in my lesson studio every week, and that was just a real drag sometimes. But whether that's like, private lesson teaching to younger students, or even just like inviting some friends over, again, in a socially distanced, safe way, and playing for each other and just having that conversation about, hey, I really liked this and you're playing, what did you like about mine, can be really nice to just remind yourself, these things about music that we all enjoy so much, and putting them into words is a really effective way to have that reminder. So those have been my 5 tips for avoiding burnout. I hope you have found them helpful. I know that when I was going through it, I struggled a lot with feeling like I was the only person in my entire studio who hated music. But again, it's something that everybody goes through at some point in their lives. You can't do this 100% of the time and not have moments where you want to do something else. It's just very human and natural. So I hope these have been helpful to you. If you have any questions or would like to talk more, this is something I'm very passionate about, so please feel free to reach out. Yeah, and that's it for today's video. We'll see you here again next week on another Choppin with Chapman.